Warning, the following footage is only things that I envision would make a great story tale, fairy tale, or folklore, and is not to be fact checked by any fact checkers ever for the duration of time into eternity. Now watch me jump off this light beam. It's just like the doubling effect, where the bad guy would choose something larger than life, but it would be for him thinking he's an intellectual or a visual, his antic larger than life, so that others would fall victim. An intellectual is great because they know what they want, but if you're bad, you would need to fill a void to not feel avoided. But if there's only two things in the world that a bad guy would want, the intellectual would need the scapegoat for a visual anti. And this would be a doubling effect, where it would be like a snake biting its tail. To fill the void, it would have to create something convoluted. And that's hard because usually if you're creating something, it shouldn't be filling a void, but he's trying to fill the void. Aside from like a love story would be the thriller, and the expectancy rate in thrillers, the more realistic it is, the more expectancy rate would be able to have a value worthy of it. And if the value of an entire world has an expectancy rate that only can be handled by the hero, and then that would make the best thriller possible. What's beautiful is math, but something also fun with math is doing stuff that's kind of funny. Ringing a doorbell and running away. But what's not pretty, or a thing that's not pretty, is death. And that's why no one wants to see someone, so they bury them after they're gone. Especially if you can't stomach it. And then everyone throws in the hat. It has written on it more for less. And then they throw that all into the bullfighting ring. Well, now this guy's fighting a bull. He has to like step on all these hats while fighting a bull. I'm a guy who knows his birthstone is sapphire, but then I also know that I don't want to be left in a conundrum on a reason to get scared of either. And if you earthquake, then it could shake a whole bunch of gravestones and bodies could come up out of the ground, and that's a whole nother can of worms. And that's why it's no wonder that the main prerogative of the best stories is if the bad guy can say that he wants the entire world, because that would be a value of anyone living in it. Well, the worst thing could happen was it to be in the hands of the wrong person. There's no wonder why the bad guy always wants the entire world. Right up in the place, I'd be at the spot, thinking for every 2 cents I'd make 1 penny off every thought. If you never thought you could come about before the hammer dropped, or the S hit the fan, once you thought it was, can't make sense if you're not even here, because you're not. I'll be wrapping up the spot, I'm like, cause I'm on the block. We in the streets, man, you know what that means. I'll be looking for every thought, cause they ain't about me. On some Russell Tussle, they ain't even not. Use a half knot cause you a half bred. That means you a cloth that came out the back end. On some Bilbo, you a bag end. You need to find a ring and go run into it, and then jump into a volcano just because you thought you could. Like, for example, in The Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch of the West, if there wasn't a tornado in Kansas, because that in turn gave Dorothy the ability to find a pail of water to throw onto the Wicked Witch. So the origin story of a tornado and a bucket of water, where the sidekick would have been Toto, how he could have circumvented a Wicked Witch would be the origin story. And that very easily could end up in a really good horror movie. So origin stories are allotted for people who didn't believe that it was that good, it couldn't have happened. And this is like a disclaimer, as if there was like a bad guy who you have some sympathy for him, because if the ends didn't justify the means, then you would be able to relay the main plot to the origin story. The origin story would be where a sidekick of the hero from the climax, if he would have had the ball in his court. And so the origin story would circumference around, and this is a side note where all the great directors, if their directions were the extended endings, the non-conventional endings, the extended scenes with the camera tricks, where they were trying to capitalize off of creative camera tricks. All of those could have the ends justifying the means in the origin story. So the two would be lined up together, where the initial stance of the bad guy having a head start is seen as where he was belittled at the starting. So where he gets his grudge that he holds strong onto the start of the original plot, that's where it is able to have a mirroring effect. So any good plot ends on where a origin story would begin at, and that's why you watch the main plot before the origin story, so that for any reason that it could have turned into a horror story where the bad guy wins in the end, that the ends are justified by the means, in seeing that the sidekick and the villain in the origin story both would have been at equal footing, unless the hero in the climax from the main plot did what he did to make the plot of the original have an end justified the means. Whereas acquiring something for no reason is what bad guys do, is how they get ahead from the start, making the conflict in an arena, instead of the climax being the bad guy winning. No, that's not at the very start, where the bad guy wins at the very start. The description through the plot is when the character gets detailed and you understand its description, is how the plot unfolds. The twist is the climax. That can't ever happen from the initial start, or else it's just the bad guy who is cheated to obtain a lead that had not been established before the origin story. It's another can of worms. Like if I say I have a bag full of mussels, and you would question, is it of an aquatic life with shells, or is it flesh of a body of a embodiment? Those are important things, but in characteristics of descriptions, the identity is devoid of the plot, because that would give reason for the character to obtain the description other than acquiring it from the start for no reason. That's what a fisheye can do in a Polaroid. I use the word codec loosely. A codec is like a cast mold, and a stable state is somewhat like this chip. How it is not moving because it's already been petrified from the elements of seclusion. Mainly, it's had all the sap dried out from it, so it's been mummified in a sense. And so a codec would have all the grains inside of it. They're established, and you can read them in renderings. And the tip of it is so great because it reads and renders all the grains in it. And what a music box does, it has like a script where it's rounded, and when you crank it, that round script hits on the planks